Live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is February 4th, 2022. Been a little while since I've had a chance to talk to you guys. I had Corona, old Omicron, but I am fully recovered now and feeling better. But it was a pretty tough few days. I've been vaccinated, gotten Corona once before, second time now. Omicron it spreads like wildfire. That an R naught of 7 means that the whole world probably has it by now. And it just shows you what happens when things have evolutionary pressure towards escaping vaccines and infecting people as quickly as possible. Anyway, doing well, doing fine, feeling good, but just had to take a little bit of time off to get better. But I'm still with you guys. All right. So, two things. First, wanted to shout out to Shlomo Cohen. He sent me this lovely thing for Hoskinson. He asked me, he said, "Hey, can I send you something?" I said, "Sure." And so he sent this to me. And I love that Logan the Lobster is there. And then I guess that's an island behind me. Pretty nifty. But I read a blog post today, and it's a blog post from Moxie Marlinspike. And I wanted to read it with you guys. And let me share my screen real quickly here. So, first off, who the hell is Moxie Marlinspike? Sounds like a made up name. Actually, something, a very prominent person in the Valley related to privacy. So, there's a little picture of Moxie. And he used to be the CTO of Whisper Systems. And, he also worked at Twitter for a little bit. But his claim to fame is that he's the co author of the Signal Protocol, which is a marvel of cryptography. And the protocol ensures off the record communication and secure communication. And so he's kind of an all around crypto guy and privacy advocate, and he's pretty bright. So whenever he writes something, it's always fun to read. So what did he write? Well, he wrote my first impressions of Web3. So I wanted to read this together with you guys because I think it really captures adequately where the hell the state of the industry is at and what people are valuing and why that's a bad thing. All right. So he says, despite considering myself a cryptographer, I have not found myself particularly drawn to, quote, crypto. I don't think I've ever actually said the words, get off my lawn, but I'm much more likely to click on Pepperidge Farm remembered flavored memes about how crypto used to mean cryptography than I am for the latest NFT drop. Also, cards on the table here. I don't share the same generational excitement for moving all aspects of life into an instrumented economy. Even strictly on the technological level, though, I haven't yet managed to become a believer. So, given all of the recent attention into what is now being called Web3, I decided to explore some of what has been happening in that space more thoroughly to see what I've been missing. So, how I think about one and two. Web3 is a somewhat ambiguous term, which makes it difficult to rigorously evaluate what the ambitions for Web3 should be. But the general thesis seems to be that Web 1 was decentralized, Web 2 centralized everything into platforms, and that Web 3 will decentralize everything again. Web 3 should give us the richness of Web 2, but somehow be decentralized. It's probably good to have some clarity on why centralized platforms emerged to begin with. And in my mind, the explanation is actually pretty simple. One, people don't want to run their own servers and never will. How many of you complain about running Daedalus nodes, right? Oh, Daedalus is not a good user experience. Well, that you're running a server actually. Think about it. The premise for Web 1 was that everyone on the internet would be both a publisher and consumer of content, as well as a publisher and consumer of infrastructure. We'd all have our own web server with our own website, our own mail server for our own email, our own finger server for our own status messages, our own ChartGen server for our own character generation. However, and I don't think this can be emphasized enough, that is not what people want. People do not want to run their own servers. Even nerds do not want to run their own servers at this point, which is actually true. It's really hard for me to actually get people to run Jitsi servers or things like that, or Discord servers. Even organizations building software full time do not want to run their own servers at this point. Yeah, how many of you guys live in the cloud? If there's one thing I hope I've learned about the world, it's that people do not want to run their own servers. The companies that emerged offering to do that for you instead were successful. And the companies that iterated on new functionality based on what is possible with those networks were even more successful. Yeah, look how rich Google is and Facebook, all these other guys are. You could always host your own Facebook page and your own Facebook website, right? But you don't. You have a Facebook page. A protocol moves much more slowly than a platform. After 30 years, email is still unencrypted. Meanwhile, WhatsApp went from unencrypted to full end-to-end encryption in a single year. People are still trying to standardize sharing a video reliably over IRC. Meanwhile, Slack lets you create custom reaction emojis based on your face. This isn't a funding issue. And actually, let me repeat that again because it's such an important statement. This isn't a funding issue. If something is truly decentralized, it becomes very difficult to change and often remains stuck in time. And that's another incredibly important point. When I criticize Bitcoin, when I say, hey, Bitcoin has issues, well, this is the crux of it. Bitcoin is incredibly valuable, and there's plenty of people willing to spend massive sums of money to fix it, upgrade it, make it better. But if it's decentralized, which many people purport, then it becomes very difficult to change and often remains stuck in time. That is a problem for technology because the rest of the ecosystem is moving very quickly. And if you don't keep up, you will fail. There are entire parallel industries focusing on defining and improving methodologies like Agile to try to figure out how to organize enormous groups of people so that they can move as quickly as possible because it's so critical. When the technology itself is more conducive to stasis than movement, that's a problem. See, guys, this is why the hard fork combinator, this is why governance is such a critical component. Because if your protocols are stuck in stasis, they have limited utility. And this is why it's such a big focus of Cardano. Anyway, back to the article. A sure recipe for success has been to take a 90s protocol that was stuck in time, centralize it, and iterate quickly. But Web3 intends to be different. So let's take a look. In order to get a quick feeling for the space and a better understanding for the future may hold, I decided to build a couple of dApps and create an NFT. All right, so what did he do? He said, well, making some distributed applications. To get a feeling for the Web3 world, I made a dApp called Autonomous Art that lets anyone mint a token for an NFT by making a visual contribution to it. The cost of making a visual contribution increases over time, and the funds a contributor pays to mint are distributed to all previous artists. Visualizing this financial structure would resemble something similar to a pyramid shape. You got to love his dry sense of humor. At the time of this writing, over $38,000 has gone into creating this collective art piece. I also made a dApp called First Derivative that allows you to create, discover, and exchange NFT derivatives which track an underlying NFT, similar to financial derivatives which track an underlying asset. Both gave me a feeling for how the space works. To be clear, there is nothing particularly, quote, distributed about the apps themselves. They're just normal React websites. Their distributedness refers to where the state and logic permissions for updating the state lives on the blockchain instead of in a centralized database. One thing that's always felt strange to me about the cryptocurrency world is the lack of attention to the client server interface. Yeah, you see, this is the key, guys. Pay attention to this one. When people talk about blockchains, they talk about distributed trust, leaderless consensus, and all the mechanics of how that works. There's always some notion, by the way, of leadered consensus. It's just how you get there. That's neither here nor there. All the mechanics of how that works, but often gloss over the reality that clients ultimately can't participate in. All the network diagrams are of servers. The trust model is between servers, and everything is about servers. Blockchains are designed to be a network of peers, but not designed such that it's really possible for your mobile device or browser to be one of those peers. Yeah, see, that's a huge problem. And some of those are limitations of the devices themselves, and some of those are limitations of the software providers. But there were some projects, to be fair, that have tried to turn a browser into making it appear. And we can certainly talk about that in a bit. But anyway, back to the article. With the shift to mobile, we now live firmly in a world of clients and servers. And, excuse me, with the former completely unable to act as the latter. And those questions seem more important to me, than ever. Meanwhile, Ethereum actually refers to servers as clients. So there's not even a word for an actual untrusted client server interface that will have to exist somewhere, and no acknowledgement that if successful, there will ultimately be billions more clients than there are servers. Let me read that again. And no acknowledgement that if successful, there will ultimately be billions more clients than servers. For example, whether it's running on mobile or the web, a dApp like Autonomous Art or First Derivative needs to interact with the blockchain somehow in order to modify or render state. The collectively produced work of the art, the edit history for it, the NFT derivatives, etc. That's not really possible to do from the client, though, since the blockchain can't live on your mobile device or in your desktop browser realistically. So the only alternative is to interact with the blockchain via a node that's running remotely on a server somewhere. Rah, a server. But as we know, people don't want to run their own servers. That's Moxie's axiom number one. As it happens, companies have emerged that sell API access to an Ethereum node. They run as a service along with providing analytics, enhanced APIs they've built on top of the default Ethereum APIs, and access to historical transactions, which sounds familiar. At this point, there are basically two companies. Almost all dApps either use Infura or Alchemy in order to interact with the blockchain. In fact, even when you connect a wallet like MetaMask to a dApp and the dApp interacts with the blockchain via your wallet, MetaMask is actually just calling usually Infura. These client APIs are not using anything to verify blockchain state or the authenticity of responses. And this is one of the cruxes of it right here. What he's saying is they lack inclusive accountability. So when you use this client, it's talking to a centralized service and it sends a response back, but they're not authenticated in a way that you can verify client side. The results aren't even signed. An app like Autonomous Art says, hey, what's the view function on this smart contract? Alchemy or Infura responds with a JSON blob that says, this is the output, and the app renders it. This was surprising to me. So much work, energy, and time has gone into creating a trustless distributed consensus mechanism. But virtually all clients that wish to access it do so by simply trusting the outputs from these two companies without any further verification. It also doesn't seem like the best privacy situation. Imagine if every time you interacted with a website in Chrome, your request first went to Google before being routed to the destination and back. Actually, in a lot of cases, it does. That's the situation with Ethereum today. All right traffic is obviously already public on the blockchain, but these companies also have visibility into almost all read requests from almost all users in almost all dApps. Two companies, Infura and Alchemy. Partisans of the blockchain might say it's okay if these types of centralized platforms emerge because the state itself is available on the blockchain. So if these platforms misbehave, clients can simply move elsewhere. However, I would suggest that that is a very simplistic view of the dynamics that make platforms what they are. Let me give you an example. This one's great. Making an NFT. I also wanted to create a more traditional NFT. Most people think of images and digital art when they think of NFTs, but NFTs generally do not store that data on chain. For most NFTs of most images, that would be much too expensive. Instead of storing on chain data, NFTs instead contain a URL that points to the data. What surprised me about the standards was that there's no hash commitment for the data located at the URL, which is extraordinary to me too. That's like, what? You can't verify that the image is authentic? Looking at many of the NFTs on popular marketplaces being sold for tens, hundreds, or millions of dollars. That URL often just points to some VPS running Apache somewhere. Anyone with access to that machine, anyone who buys that domain name in the future, or anyone who compromises that machine can change the image, title, description, etc. for the NFT to whatever they'd like at any time, regardless of whether or not they own the token. There's nothing in the NFT spec that tells you what the image should be or even allows you to confirm whether something is the quote correct image. So as an experiment, I made an NFT, and this is why I love Moxie. He didn't just say it, he does it. So as an experiment, I made an NFT that changes based on who is looking at it. Since the web server that serves the image can choose to serve different images based on the IP or user agreement of the requester, for example, it looked one way on OpenSea, another way on Rarible. But when you buy it and view it, your crypto wallet should always be displayed as a large poop emoji. What you bid on it isn't what you get. There's nothing unusual about this NFT. It's just how the NFT specifications are built. Many of the highest priced NFTs could turn into a poop emoji at any time. I just made it explicit. So he shows a little picture of the view on NFT on OpenSea, the view on Rarible, and then poop in the wallet. After a few days, without warning or explanation, the NFT I made was removed from OpenSea and NFT Marketplace. It was removed right here. The takedown suggests they violated some form of terms of service, but after reading the terms, I don't see anything any that prohibit an NFT which changes based on where it's being looked at from, and I was openly describing it that way. What I found most interesting, though, is that after OpenSea removed my NFT, it no longer appeared in any crypto wallet on my device. This is Web3, though. How is that possible, right? It's supposed to be on the blockchain. A crypto wallet like MetaMask, Rainbow, is non-custodial. The keys are kept client side, but it has the same problem as my dApps above. A wallet has to run on a mobile device or in your browser. Meanwhile, Ethereum and other blockchains have been designed with the idea that it's a network of peers, but not designed such that it's really possible for your mobile device or your browser to be one of those peers. A wallet like MetaMask needs to do basic things like display your balance, your recent transactions, and your NFTs, as well as more complex things like constructing transactions, interacting with smart contracts. In short, MetaMask needs to interact with the blockchain. But the blockchain has been built such that clients like MetaMask can't interact with it. So, like my dApp, MetaMask accomplishes this by making API calls to 3 companies that have consolidated in this space. For instance, MetaMask displays your recent transaction by making an API call to Etherscan. He actually puts the call here and displays your account balance by making a API call to Infura and displays your NFTs by making an API call to OpenSea. So what's really happening is centralized service, centralized service, centralized service, unauthenticated. And here is the unauthenticated JSON blob that he's talking about. So you're just trusting 3 centralized services for your entire display. Again, like with my dApp, these responses are not authenticated in some way. They're not even signed so that you could later prove they were lying. It reuses the same connections, TLS session tickets, etc., for all the accounts in your wallet. So if you're managing multiple accounts in your wallet to maintain some identity separation, these companies know they're linked. MetaMask doesn't actually do much. It's just a view onto data provided by these centralized APIs. This isn't a problem specific to MetaMask. What other option do they have? Rainbow are set up exactly the same way. Interestingly, Rainbow has their own data for social features that they're building into the wallet, social graph showcases, and have chosen to build it all on top of Firebase instead of the blockchain. All this means that if your NFT is removed from OpenSea, it also disappears from your wallet. It doesn't functionally matter that my NFT is indelibly on the blockchain somewhere because the wallet and increasingly everything else in your ecosystem is just using the OpenSea API to display NFTs, which begins returning 304 no content for the query of NFTs owned by my address. Isn't that remarkable? We say trustless and decentralized, and that's where we're at. recreating this world. Given the history of why Web 1 became Web 2, what seems strange to me about Web 3 is that technologies like Ethereum have been built with many of the same implicit trappings as Web 1. To make these technologies usable, the space is consolidating around platforms. Again, people who run servers for you and iterate the new functionality that emerges. Infura, OpenSea, Coinbase, Etherscan. Likewise, the Web3 protocols are slow to evolve. Yeah, because they don't have governance built in, right? When building first derivative, it would have been great to price minting derivatives as a percentage of the underlying value. The data isn't on chain, but it's in an API that OpenSea will give you. People are excited about NFT royalties for the way that they can benefit creators, but royalties aren't specified in the ERC 721 specification, and it's too late to change it. So OpenSea has its own way of configuring royalties that exist in the Web 2 space, the centralized space. Iterating quickly on centralized platforms is already outpacing the distributed protocols and consolidating control into platforms. Again, centralized platforms. Given those dynamics, I don't think it should be a surprise that we're already at a place where your crypto wallet's view of NFTs is OpenSea's view of your NFTs. I don't think we should be surprised that OpenSea isn't a peer view that can be replaced, since it's busy iterating the platform beyond what is possible strictly with the impossible slash difficult to change standards. I think it's very similar to the situation with email. I can run my own server, but it doesn't functionally matter for privacy, censorship, resistance, or control, because Gmail is going to be on the other end of every email that I send or receive anyway. Once a distributed ecosystem centralizes around a platform for convenience, it becomes the worst of both worlds. And this is actually, I think, one of the most important sentences in the entire write up. So I'll read it again. Once a distributed ecosystem centralizes around a platform for convenience, it becomes the worst of both worlds. Centralized control, but still distributed enough to become mired in time. So you get slow evolution, and to compensate, you get centralized control, and you have the worst of both worlds. I can build my own NFT marketplace, but it doesn't offer any additional control if OpenSea mediates the view of all NFTs in the wallets people use and every other app in the ecosystem. This isn't a complaint about OpenSea or an indictment of what they've built, just the opposite. They're trying to build something that works. I think we should expect this kind of platform consolidation to happen. And given the inevitable design systems that give us what we want when that's how things are organized. My sense and concern, though, is that the Web3 community expects some other outcome than what we've already been seeing. It's early days. It's early days still, is the most common refrain I see from people in the Web3 space when discussing matters like these. In some ways, cryptocurrency's failure to scale beyond relatively nascent engineering is what makes it possible to consider the days, quote, early, since objectively it's already been a decade or more. However, even if this is just the beginning, and it very well might be, I'm not sure we should consider that any consolidate. I'm not sure we should consider that any consolation. I think the opposite might be true. It seems like we should take notice that from the very beginning, these technologies immediately tended towards centralization through platforms in order for them to be realized. That this has zero negatively felt effect on the velocity of the ecosystem. In other words, people don't care. And that most participants don't even know or care it's happening. Think about that. All this centralization is occurring, nobody cares. This might suggest that the centralization itself is not actually of immediate practical or pressing importance to the majority of people downstream. That the only amount of decentralization people want is the minimum amount required for something to exist, and that if it not very consciously accounted for, these forces will push us further from rather than closer to the ideal outcome as the days become less early. But you can't stop a gold rush. When you think about it, OpenSea would actually be much, quote, better in the immediate sense if all Web3 parts were gone. It would be faster, cheaper for everyone, and easier to use. For example, to accept a bid on my NFT, I would have had to have paid $80 to $150 just in Ethereum transaction fees. That puts an artificial floor on all bids, since otherwise you'd lose money by accepting a bid for less than the gas fee. Payment fees by credit card would typically feel extraordinary, which typically feel extraordinary, look cheap compared to that. OpenSea would even publish a simple transparency log if people wanted a public record of transactions, offers, bids to verify their accounting. However, if they had built a platform to buy and sell images that wasn't nominally based on crypto, excuse me, I don't think it would have taken off. Not because it isn't distributed, because as we've seen, so much of what's required to make it work is already not distributed. I don't think it would have taken off because this is a gold rush. People have made money through cryptocurrency speculation. Those people are interested in spending that cryptocurrency in ways that support their investment while offering additional returns. And so that defines the setting for the market of transfer of wealth. The people at the end of the line who are flipping NFTs do not fundamentally care about distributed trust models or payment mechanisms, but they care where the money is. So the money draws people into OpenSea. They improve the experience by building a platform that iterates on the underlying Web3 protocols in the Web2 space. They offer the ability to mint NFTs through OpenSea itself instead of through your own smart contract. And eventually, this opens the door for Coinbase to offer access to the validated NFT token with their own platform via your debit card. That holds the door open to Coinbase managing the tokens themselves through dark pools that Coinbase holds, which hopefully eliminates the transaction fees and makes it possible to avoid having to interact with smart contracts at all. Eventually, all the Web3 components are gone, and you have a website for buying and selling JPEGs with your debit card. The project can't start as a Web2 platform because of the market dynamics, but the same market dynamics and fundamental forces of centralization will likely drive it to end up there. And at the end of the stack, NFT artists are accumulation and investment in their art. It also seems like if the point of Web3 is to avoid the trappings of Web2, we should be concerned that this is already the natural tendency for these new protocols that are supposed to offer a different future. I think these market forces will likely continue. And in my mind, the question of how long it continues is a question of whether the vast amounts of accumulated cryptocurrency are ultimately inside an engine or a leaky bucket. If the money flowing through NFTs ends up channeled back into the crypto space, it would continue to accelerate forever, regardless of whether or not it's just Web 2 by 2. If it churns out, then this will be a blip. Personally, I think enough money has been made at this point that there are enough faucets to keep it going. But this won't be just a blip. If that's the case, it seems worth thinking about how to avoid Web 2 being Web 2 by 2, Web 2 with even less privacy, with some urgency. Creativity might not be enough. I have only dipped my toe in the waters of Web3, looking at through the lens of these small projects, though. I can easily see why so many people find Web3 so neat. I don't think it's on a trajectory to deliver us from centralized platforms. I don't think it will fundamentally change our relationship to technology. And I think the privacy score is already below par for the internet, which is already a pretty low bar. But I also understand why nerds like me are excited to build for it. It is, at the very least, something new on the nerd level, and that creates a space for creativity exploration that is somewhat reminiscent of the early internet days. Ironically, part of that creativity probably springs from the constraints that make Web3 so clunky. I'm hopeful that the creativity and exploration we're seeing will have positive outcomes, but I'm not sure if it's enough to prevent all the same dynamics of the internet from unfolding. If we do want to change our relationship to technology, I think we have to do it intentionally. And my basic thoughts are roughly one, we should accept the premise that people will not run their own servers by designing systems that can distribute trust without having to distribute infrastructure. That's such an important statement. And it shows you the guy knows what the hell he's doing. This means architecture that anticipates and accepts the inevitable outcome of relatively centralized client server relationships, but uses cryptography rather than infrastructure to distribute trust. One of the surprising things to me about Web3, despite being built on, quote, crypto, is how little cryptography seems to be involved. And two, we should try to reduce the burden of building software. At this point, software projects require an enormous amount of human effort. Even relatively simple apps require a group of people to sit in front of a computer 8 hours a day, every day, forever. This wasn't always the case, and there was a time when 50 people working on a software project wasn't considered a, quote, small team. As long as the software requires such concerted effort and so much highly specialized human focus, I think it will have the tendency to serve the interests of the people sitting in that room every day rather than what we may consider our broader goals. I think changing our relationship to technology will probably require making software easier to create, but in my lifetime, I've seen the opposite come to pass. Unfortunately, I think distributed systems have a tendency to exacerbate this trend by making things more complicated and more difficult, not less complicated, less difficult. GM. Hell of a write up. And, it's great because you have a guy from the outside who's giving our industry a chance, and he approaches it like an information security guy would. And so he builds some things, and then he notices all the centralized points of failure, and he notices that he can manipulate things in ways that people didn't expect. This is why we wrote the Mithril paper. So there's this concept of inclusive accountability, and he's absolutely right when he talks about at the end of the paper, we should accept that people are probably not going to run their own servers and that we're going to have billions of clients and still have some servers, because that's what's happened every single time we've given people an opportunity. Well, things like Mithril is a broader conversation into inclusive accountability, these types of technologies, where on the wire, in the transaction, in the protocol itself, you guys get enough information that you're able to self-verify that the things you're looking at are correct. You see, and that's the only way we're going to get there. Infrastructure is commoditized. It's fluid. There are winners and losers, and it's verticalized, meaning that people have incentives to build gargantuan data centers, and there's economy of scale. And if it's a game of economics, people are going to optimize the cheapest experience. So the natural state of affairs is to push a lot of these things from your desktop to your laptop, to push it to basically a third party custodian. The point of Mithril and the point of these types of research, the point of extended UTXO, we talk about local state, is to get as much of the logic and the activity that you guys are seeing as possible into a proof that you're able to check and verify. The point of governance is what he's mentioning up here about these ossified protocols. You have to be able to evolve the protocols quickly at the same speed that the centralized software does. Otherwise, the natural tendency will be to take stuff out of the protocols and have them run somewhere else. And then we're not the only people in this game. Like Starkware does some great stuff. They wrote this beautiful blog post on fractal scaling, and they're talking about saying, well, we can still recursively embed certain structures inside centralized infrastructure, and it just kind of works its way to a base layer, and you end up getting high scalability in transactions, even though you have centralized infrastructure with the same trust model of an underlying root of trust. But I just wanted to read this for you guys because Moxie's a real guy, and there's a lot of real people that don't take crypto seriously because there's the advertisement and there's the gold rush, and then there's what's happening. And when we looked at things like the design of Ouroboros, and when we looked at other things, it's really hard to build decentralized protocols and try to predict what keeps this protocol getting more decentralized as you're staying at the same level of decentralization over time. It's super hard. It's a massive engineering challenge. It's a massive incentives challenge. And it's a massive protocol design challenge. And then we talk about dApp development. What type of model of dApp development forces you to build things in a way where you use cryptography at the very base? And you have all kinds of things in your toolkit, proofs and signatures and other things to be able to, when a user's using it, they on their side can verify what they're looking at is right. So when you have all these VC people and these other people running out of space, and they say, "Oh, well, they have all these dApps and they're doing all these transactions." Well, if only 2 servers, 3 servers, 4 servers, 4 companies are controlling your entire experience, and none of that's actually running, or very little is actually running on the underlying blockchain infrastructure, how is that any different from Amazon or Rackspace or DigitalOcean or any of these other guys? Honestly, you're just putting a different coat of paint on it, and you've moved the goalposts. The goalposts for Cardano were always saying, how do you build truly decentralized things? And what collection of research and incentives and mechanisms do you need that you keep the system decentralizing over time in the experience? And yes, there are consequences to that. For example, Daedalus is a server. You guys complain about it a lot. You say, "Oh, it's so slow. It's so slow. All these other guys, it's so fast." Yeah, it's real fast when it's centralized. It's not so fast when it's decentralized. So how do you make something that's fundamentally decentralized faster? That's a huge engineering challenge. It requires an enormous amount of work and a lot of engineering and thought. But when you do, everybody who has it is actually running a server. So there's a little bit of that. And of the centralized stuff, how do you build a model where even though somebody else is doing something for you, you can check their work, you can preserve inclusive accountability? It's a very big challenge as well. It's something interesting to think about. So think for yourselves and really take a step back and try to understand what's going on. There's a lot of Dunning-Kruger in this industry where people seem to think they're domain experts and they got it all figured out. And the only metric they care about is price. So if price high, you're doing a good job. Price low, you're doing a bad job. Guys, share price of Google is pretty high. Doesn't necessarily mean that's a decentralized experience, right? So you have to take a step back and all these things and say, what are we really trying to achieve? It is pretty shitty and sad if all we get after all this is said and done is just a rehash of Web 2, but now it's even slower and more expensive because it's got some weird blockchain infrastructure behind it. But 5 guys basically get to decide the whole thing, and you can be deplatformed at any time. To the alliances like the DeFi Alliance and the emerging NFT Alliance, these other things, we have to create standards where we preserve decentralization, inclusive accountability, and the user is aware of that and they're party to that. And you authenticate things like an NFT standard on Cardano as those emerge and materialize. Yeah, we should probably put a hash of all the stuff that we're trying to create property around, as well as legal nexus and a litany of other things. Okay. So our standards have to evolve faster and our protocols have to evolve faster. That's the great challenge of governance. And if you put all these things together in the right way, scalability, interoperability, and sustainability, you end up getting an ecosystem that doesn't suffer from what we've seen happen in the Ethereum ecosystem, which is brilliant but flawed. That's what I'm after, and that's what you guys are after, I hope. That's the point of the Cardano project. So I hope that this gives you guys some food for thought. I included the link to the blog post if you didn't want to listen to me reading it in the description. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.